Let me speak to the yet unknowing world. So shall you hear of carnal, bloody, and unnatural acts, of accidental judgments, casual slaughters. All this I can truly deliver. My lord, I think I saw the king, your father.
I'll watch tonight. No chance to walk again. Speak. I'm bound to hear it.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed to walk the night until the foul crimes done against my nature are burned away. Murder most foul, as in the best it is, but this most foul, strange, and unnatural.
Murder?
The leprous distillment, whose effect holds such an enmity, the blood of man, most laser-like, with vile and loathsome crust.
Haste me to know it, that I, with wings as swift as meditation or the thoughts of love, may sleep to my revenge.
As I was sewing in my closet, Lord Hamlet, with his doublet all unbraced, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking against each other, and with a look so piteous in purport as if he had been loosed out of hell, to speak of horrors. He comes before me, he took me by the wrist and held me hard. He falls to a perusal of my face as he would draw it. At last, a little shaking of mine arm, he raised a sigh so piteous and profound. That done, he lets me go, and with his head over his shoulder turned, he seemed to find his way without his eyes.
I will be brief. Your noble son is mad.
Mother, you have my father much offended.
What have I done that thou darest wag thy tongue in a noise so rude against me?
Such an act that blurs the grace and blush of modesty, calls virtue hypocrite, making marriage vows as false as dice opens.
Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, out in the morning bedtime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine. Then up he rose and donned his clothes and tapped the chamber door, let in the maid that out the maid never departed more.
Not that I did not think you loved your father, but thy love is begun thy time. What would you undertake to show yourself your father's son, if indeed not in words?
To cut his throat in the church.
No place indeed should murder sanctuarize. Revenge has no bounds.
You will lose, my lord. If your mind dislike anything, obey it. I will forestall the repair hither, and say you are not fit.
Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to The Tonight Show. I'm your host, Clara Alexander, and today I'll be interviewing the cast and crew of the new award-winning film, Hamlet. First up, we have the director and costume designer. Our first question is for Clara. Can you tell us what drove you to create this film in the first place?
Well, I've always loved the play, and I really wanted to make something that would make the audience see this as something beyond the plot itself. A lot of conflicts we see in the play are still very relevant today, even though it did take place hundreds of years ago. Shakespeare gives us a lot to think about on gender roles, revenge, mental health, as well as several motifs.
I see. So even though the movie took place a couple hundred years ago, its conflicts are still applicable to the problems we humans face today.
That's correct.
So the clothing and jewelry in this film are breathtaking. What was the thought process behind the costume design?
A lot of the jewelry and clothing, especially Ophelia's, carry some very symbolic meanings. In the play, many of the characters describe Ophelia's character as very delicate, subdued, and feminine, and they often use references to flowers because during that time, flowers had very specific meanings to them. So to emphasize that part of the play, which probably isn't as apparent to an audience today, I decided that I'd try to incorporate different floral patterns in her dresses and even her jewelry.
Next up, we have Sylvia and Ola. So Sylvia, what was it like playing Hamlet? What characteristics are unique to him?
So obviously, Hamlet's a very complex character, and I think we see a lot of different sides of him depending on sort of at what point of play we are and who he's talking to. Just a very interesting dynamic with him, with his whole feigned versus real madness, and I thought that was an interesting thing to try to bring out, especially with that scene interacting with Ophelia.
And how did Hamlet's character change depending on who he was interacting with in the film?
I think Hamlet definitely does change a lot depending on who he's talking to. There are some characters with whom he's a lot calmer with, especially Horatio, his friend who he trusts a lot. He's really able to confide in him, versus perhaps his interactions with Ophelia and Gertrude, where he gets a lot more emotional. Like with Ophelia, he sort of loses his sanity and sort of almost acts like a lost puppy, versus with his mother, where he gets very angry and violent and pretty much loses all his self-control. But yeah, so when it comes to other characters who he knows that are being untruthful to him, I think Hamlet is a lot more crafty, and he's able to sort of play them the same way that they're trying to play him, and he's a lot more composed when interacting with them.
Can you tell us a little bit about the motif of real versus feigned madness in relation to Hamlet?
So yeah, like I was saying earlier with his interactions with different characters, I think Hamlet's madness also varies depending on who he's interacting with, and that it becomes a lot more real when it comes to characters like Ophelia or Gertrude, but then he sort of feigns it to try to manipulate Claudius the way that he knows that his stepfather's trying to manipulate him. So like in the beginning, Hamlet has this crafty plan to get revenge and to sort of pretend to be mad so that people don't suspect him in doing anything. But towards the end, the revenge sort of gets to his head and he becomes fully mad.
Now Ola, many see Horatio as just a sidekick. What is his role in the film and why is he important?
Alright, well, Horatio, he stays and the most logical out of the whole play. He is Hamlet's one loyal friend, and I wouldn't say he's a sidekick, but he is there most of the time, not that major a role, but he sees things from a different perspective, like, say, Ophelia's madness when Hamlet wasn't there, and he doesn't let judgment cloud his views. He tells Hamlet what he saw, and he knows it's going to be hard on him to see that his love is descended into craziness, but he tells him.
And finally, a question for both of you. What is the nature of Horatio and Hamlet's relationship?
Well, first of all, Horatio is sort of Hamlet's only friend, as Ola here previously mentioned. Especially towards the end, like when Hamlet's preparing for his duel against Laertes, Horatio's there warning him, to be careful, to sort of listen to his instincts, and I think he genuinely cares about Hamlet and his safety, unlike anybody else in the play.
I do.
Next up, we have Emma Castle and Clara Alexander, who played Ophelia and Gertrude. So Emma, what was it like to play Ophelia?
Playing Ophelia was a challenge because at the beginning of the film, she's very submissive and agreeing to the wishes of Polonius and her brother Laertes. But in the later part of the film, we see that there's this sudden shift where she becomes mad and she loses all her composure and seems trapped in this delirium or hallucination between fantasy and reality. And it's almost as if Ophelia was playing two completely different characters.
I see. So, can you tell us a little bit about the nature imagery that's so commonly associated with your character?
Ophelia is always surrounded by nature wherever she goes in a physical sense, but also in the way people treat her. And she never really has a lot to say. She's kind of just there and does what others tell her what to do because she was never taught otherwise. Her only role model is Gertrude, who kind of uses her for her own motives and figure out Hamlet because of her beauty, and she has this idea that her beauty will solve all of Hamlet's problems.
So Clara, can you talk a little bit about Gertrude's character? In my opinion, Gertrude is one of those characters that you either love or you hate. On the one hand, she did marry her husband's brother a mere 2 months after her husband's death, and it is implied that she was having an affair with Claudius before King Hamlet's death. Furthermore, it can be argued that she is a passive parent. Most of the time, she stands back instead of taking an active role in her son's life. One of the only times that she does play an active role in her son's life is when she asks Ophelia to spy on Hamlet. However, it is easy to sympathize with Gertrude. We were never told the details of her marriage with King Hamlet. Maybe it was confining, mundane, or abusive, and Gertrude's affair was an attempt to escape a failing relationship. Additionally, Gertrude is borderline assaulted by Hamlet in the scene where he yells at her in the bedroom. He clearly has a strange obsession with Gertrude's relationship with Claudius. Finally, in the last scene, it's unclear whether or not Gertrude's death is a suicide. If it was a suicide, this makes her character more sympathetic. Interesting. Now a question for both of you. What is the role of gender in the play?
In this context, your gender really determines how and what you can do. And in a sense, it's limiting for both parties because you have Gertrude and Ophelia, as Clara said, in these limiting roles, but you also have Hamlet, who's portrayed as this very emotional character, but everyone calls him out for that when Claudius tells him that it's 'tis unmanly grief.
Hamlet clearly has a sexist view of women in the play. He even says, "Frailty, thy name is woman." While his attitudes towards women are probably an artifact of the time that he lives in, it is also possible that they stem from his distrust towards Ophelia and Gertrude. Finally, we have Christina and Ola, who played Claudius and Laertes. Christina, to what extent do you think Claudius regrets killing King Hamlet?
So it's possible he regretted it at the beginning and maybe some brief period of time, like maybe before he's like going to sleep or something. But I think if he had a second chance to do it all over again, he'd still kill his brother because he wanted to be king, and he became king, and he wanted to marry Gertrude, and he married Gertrude. He wouldn't have redone it because he got exactly what he wanted, and he wouldn't really give that up, so I don't think he regretted it.
Ola, at what point does Laertes finally gain respect for Hamlet?
Well, I would say that he finally gained respect for Hamlet after, during their duel, when they figured out they were both being played as pawns in some huge game. I would think that seeing how Hamlet wanted to get revenge on Claudius, Laertes would gain respect from that.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for tonight's show. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night when we interview the cast and crew of the new award-winning film, 100 Years of Solitude.
Claudius or Polonius.
A lot of the
Kitty! That's Bleeper too.
Murder or like murder?
No place indeed should murder sanctuaries. Oh, I stood up at the wrong part.
I'll watch tonight.
nature in a burning way.
Christina.
Hey, Christina.
Solitude. I took a wig, it's kind of weird. I don't know if I should do the wig.